very simple. The answer is that museums, and not just the big museums, but the middle-sized museums, are more and more enthralled to people on their boards who are collectors, and those people are spending a lot of money on certain kinds of things, and they don't want to hear a curator say to them, we should do a show of X, because which by the way, you could buy for $10,000 when they just spent $100,000 on Y. And you know, the hard times show, the fact of where that show ended up in New York, right, at the National Academy of that really tells you something about our world, how far out of the mainstream, really tells you something about how tunnel vision the sort of center of the art world has become. The most I ever hope for is that maybe we can find some brave curators, a few brave collectors, some second-string museums, some of the better university museums and galleries that will try to build an alternate history of the kind you were talking about. Because one of the things that's such a killer is, even if there is a show, then this stuff goes away. If you're lucky, it goes into private collections. But it would be marvelous to be able to go to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and go to a museum and see a range of really good but less sung paintings of one kind or another. And I, for years, have hoped that this would happen. I mean, I think it was a model of what Chick Austin did at the Lodge of Athenaeum in Hartford in the 30s, where he was buying Mondrian and Balthus and all kinds of things, often before the museum, you know, the New York Museum. And I always wonder, why isn't it that in, you know, like a Grand, the Rose Archive Grand, at some of these places, a few brave curators can't get together with some independent-minded collectors, because you need money.
And yet there is, I don't know if the wheels of justice grind very fine. I do know they grind slowly. And yet they do grind. So we do have now a resurgence of interest in Ligia Clark and Gago, and you know, at a point, you know, long overdue, and yet nevertheless something is like moved to the point where major institutions are now getting interested. Like, I don't, like, is it like you hit like the brontosaurus on the tail and it takes like 20 years to get to the head or something, the sensation? There is something does move. There's an element, maybe there's grassroots, and that moves politics to a certain degree.
It does move, but I don't want to seem overly dark, because I do think that the ability for good art and the hunger to find the unexpected is always there. There are always people in their studios who are looking, who are finding, who are doing that. That always exists. But the other thing that you see as you go on is there was a huge interest in the American abstract artists of the 30s, in the 70s and 80s, and they were shown more at the Met and the Modern. And now it's all gone. Where do you see a Burgoyne-Diller or Ilya Bolotowski in a major New York museum now? They had a moment, but it's very hard to keep the attention on these things too. So, I don't know. I mean, I think
I have a thought. What? I have a thought about this, which is that somewhere, and again, this is not a, I don't want it to register as a complaint, but I think it's a registering of difference. Somewhere, the art world and world, say, of painting or studio practice diverged. And so even now, you know, like in the large museums, even the large museums have run out of space because it's so given to like theatrical presentation. So you have I remember being at the Modern and looking at a de Kooning and hearing like explosions going off in some video in some dark corner, some other place. Yeah. It's like this idea that you cannot look at a painting in silence any longer. And silence is part of the language of painting in a certain level. And you know, it's completely unrealistic. But I sort of wish there was like a museum of painting now at this point, or a separate building for painting.
I don't think that painting needs to be seen as violence. I don't think that painting needs to be separated from other forms of art. As you point out,
I don't feel that painting needs to be seen as violence, but I would like the option.
I don't think it touches everything, but I also think there's a danger in believing that technology changes everything. I think technology can change some things, can improve some things, but there's in every generation there's a kind of apocalyptic excitement around whatever the new technology.
In spite of all of that, in spite of all the claims that are attention, we have a daily life in the studio. We go to the studio. Sometimes it's weekly. I just moved to Brooklyn, and it's pretty lovely here. Thank you very much. Let me go now. I still got to unpack. There's interruptions, but our whole drive is to get back in the studio, to get back to our area, the area of making where we are most comfortable, where we are most eloquent and most practiced, and that drive is something that's the connecting train from our life, maybe even pre-college, to the end of our life. And that's the one big thing the hedgehog knows. The artist gets in the studio, and the artist doesn't know, even if her body of work is going to have a level of diversity that it winds up having, that it's going to tell the story that it tells. At any given moment, we're preoccupied with the slice of work that's preoccupying us. When Lord was making Virginia River paintings, he was like preoccupied with the essentialization and the break from the black and white diamonds, and this all of a sudden this resurgent memory of landscape. And you never know like what what's going to be like the most emblematic work of your lifetime in that wave of history you're making. And then he continues beyond that. He makes the more sort of, I would say, sort of urban or urbane diamond paintings where color emerges, the color from the Blue River paintings on display in a more kind of images that reflect, technology and the urban skyline more upstairs. And what we're left with at the end of someone's life is a narrative. It's not just one, great body of work that's going to be the thing that his reputation is going to rise and fall on. It's a life lived. You said something about this earlier about this idea of having much more fluidity and flexibility in terms of periodization than we tend to frame things now, and we're forced to frame things now almost by the capitalist system, we could argue. To look at this work is to look at a level of seriousness carried through many different modalities, all of which are connected, but at no one point is there, I don't think we should feel the need to say this is the ultimate refined. Another point, which is more of a narrative point, and a sociological point, which is the relationship of the individual to subject matter, and how they're linked as this sort of myth of individuation through redemptive subject matter in some way. I think Europe, the heroes were, as Roberto Colasso says, the heroes had to be killed because they were monsters. And so, the end of Greek mythology is the end of heroes. And to be a hero in Europe is to court fascism. It's something that's politically understood. In America, we have this pioneer culture that overruns indigenous peoples, and it's a culture of wannabe heroes. And so this whole connection of art making is either connected to, you have to justify it as Deacons did as work, labor, or you have to justify it as a kind of framing of the heroic